He punched me right there in open court with cameras rolling and a judge watching, just because I reached for my ID. I was a decorated Army officer, a public defender, a black woman who had served her country with honor. But none of that mattered to him, or her. Not in a system designed to silence people like me. What they didn't know, I wasn't just a victim. I was a storm. And by the time the truth came out, the cop who hit me would be in prison, the judge who protected him disgraced, and the entire city forced to reckon with the question. What happens when the woman they tried to silence turns out to be the one with the power to tear it all down? A true battle for justice doesn't begin in the streets. It begins in the courtroom when someone finally stands up and refuses to sit down. He punched me, right there in open court. No warning, no hesitation. Just because I reached into my bag for my ID, I can still feel the sting on my cheek, the hot flash of pain, the gasps echoing around the courtroom, ricocheting off the wood-paneled walls like gunshots. It wasn't just the slap. It was the sound of something deeper cracking, the sound of a line being crossed, loud and final. And standing behind the man who hit me, Sergeant Blake Turner, was Judge Carol Whitmore, a stone-faced woman in her 50s, with a platinum bob, wire-rimmed glasses, and a navy blue robe that somehow seemed tighter than her clenched jaw. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her hand hovered near the gavel like she was deciding whether to use it or not. Then she did something worse. She looked away, as if I wasn't even there. I'm Naomi Ellison, public defender, black, 42 years old. I live in a modest brownstone in Newark, New Jersey, with my rescue pit bull Jasper, and a file cabinet full of names the system tried to forget. I wasn't always like this, driven, relentless, brittle around the edges. There was a time I believed in the system. I used to serve in it. U.S. Army Military Intelligence, rank Lieutenant Colonel. But I gave up my uniform to protect a different kind of battlefield. One where poor kids, especially kids of color, are thrown into courtrooms like sheep into slaughterhouses. Where plea deals are dangled like candy, and the gavel falls faster than a heartbeat. That morning, I walked into Municipal Courtroom B, defending a 17-year-old boy named Dante Mercer. No priors. Straight A student. Arrested for loitering outside his own apartment building. The judge was late. The bailiff chewed gum. And the cop, him. Sergeant Blake Turner. Tall, white, barrel-chested. He wore his badge like a brand, and his ego like a second belt. He eyed me the moment I stepped in. "You lost, ma'am," he sneered as I placed my briefcase down. I didn't answer. I never do. I've had years of practice turning ignorance into white noise. Dante looked at me with those big, terrified eyes as I handed him the motion to dismiss. "Are we gonna win?" he whispered. I smiled. "We already did the moment you chose not to stay silent." I needed to show ID for the court record. I reached into my bag. That's when it happened. I didn't even see his fist. Just the blur. Then heat. My head snapped sideways. My body jolted, chair scraping loudly across the floor. And for a moment, silence. Even the stenographer's hands froze. Then the murmur rose. Court observers. A journalist from NJ Today. A young man filming with his phone before the bailiff swiped it from him. But the judge. She still hadn't moved. I touched my cheek. It was swelling. I was just getting my identification, I said. My voice cracked. "She had something in her bag," Turner barked. "Could have been a weapon. She's a public defender," someone gasped. I saw her reach fast, he insisted now, less sure of himself. I stood. My knees trembled, but my back didn't bend. Your Honor, I demand that officer be removed immediately and placed under review. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. Finally, Miss Ellison, I will not tolerate disruptions in my courtroom. My jaw dropped. I was assaulted in front of you, I snapped. By an officer who clearly has no idea how to de-escalate or distinguish between a weapon and a wallet. I said, "Order," the judge repeated, and then, without warning, she banged the gavel. Hard. Case dismissed. This session is adjourned. That was it. No reprimand, no apology, no accountability. I looked at Dante. He looked back at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Get her out," I heard Turner mutter to a second officer. They came toward me. I didn't move. Not yet. Outside the courtroom, I sat on the concrete steps, the sun beating down on my cheek, now swollen and red. Dante's mother knelt beside me, pressing a bottle of water wrapped in tissue to my face. "I saw it," she whispered. "He hit you like you weren't even human." That's when I cried, not from pain, not from shame, but because deep inside I had hoped, prayed that we had moved past this. That the courtroom at least was sacred, but it wasn't. Not when the system was built to silence certain voices. Not when pain like mine was met with indifference. By noon, the video had gone viral. Someone had caught it before the phone was snatched. The clip was short, grainy, but clear enough. The slap, my stunned face, the judge doing nothing. Justice for Naomi trended by 2 p.m., but the police union called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. And the mayor, he said he'd look into it. Look into it. Like my face was a file in a drawer. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I heard it again. The slap, the silence, the gavel, the click of polished shoes walking past me like I was furniture. I stared at the ceiling until dawn. Then I rose, walked into my study, and unlocked a cabinet I hadn't touched in years. My Army records, service medals, letters from command, and at the very bottom a laminated card faded at the edges. My official clearance, still valid. I held it in my hand, heart thudding. They didn't know who I was. They saw a black woman with a briefcase and assumed weakness. They assumed silence. They assumed I'd disappear like all the others. But they were wrong. I didn't come this far to vanish. That was the day I stopped waiting for justice. That was the day I declared war. I didn't step into that courtroom to become a headline. I came to defend a teenage boy the system had already labeled guilty without evidence, without a trial. But now my own face was plastered across every screen in America. CNN, MSNBC. Even Fox, though they cropped out the officer's fist. The video looped endlessly. A black woman being hit in a courtroom. By a white cop in front of a silent judge. It wasn't just violence, it was ritual. A performance of power. And I was the body left behind on stage. I sat in the small living room of my Newark home. Sunlight trying and failing to cut through the gray blinds. The bruising on my face had darkened to an angry plum. My phone buzzed every few seconds, calls from journalists, law professors, ex-military colleagues, and hate mail. Plenty of that. She was aggressive. She reached into her bag. Police did what they had to do, but the worst were the quiet ones. The ones who said nothing at all. Not even a message. Not even a, "Are you okay?" Jasper, my pit bull, rested his head on my lap. He whimpered every time I winced. I used to believe there was dignity in law. That if I played it straight, no shortcuts, no shouting, I'd be heard. But after Turner's slap, the courthouse turned into a fortress. I wasn't allowed back in. They said it was for my safety. Translation: They wanted me gone. They didn't want a woman with a scarred cheek and a louder voice reminding everyone that justice wasn't blind, it was blindfolded by choice. 3 days later, I was served. A letter. Formal, immaculately phrased. Your access to court premises is suspended pending internal investigation of the incident on January 18th. They made it sound like I was the one under review. I laughed. A hollow, cracked laugh. The kind you let out when you know if you don't, you'll scream. That's when I realized they weren't done with me. They wanted to erase me. Not just from the courtroom, from the narrative, from the system itself. I drove across town to the Legal Aid Society office. Colleagues stood awkwardly as I entered. Some offered hugs. Others stared at their screens. Denise, the office manager, whispered, "They want you to take a leave. Just for a while. Until this blows over." "This?" I asked. "You mean my assault." She swallowed. "Naomi, they're worried about optics." Optics. That word again. Like my pain was a shadow they could crop out of the frame. I picked up my files, walked to the break room, and sat in the same plastic chair I had for 7 years. On the bulletin board, someone had pinned a cartoon, Lady Justice, but her scales were filled with cash. I stared at it a long time. Then I stood. That night I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Colonel Marion Reese. She answered on the second ring. "Ellison," she said flatly, but there was warmth beneath the frost. "I saw the video. Thought you retired from combat zones. Turns out the battlefield just changed uniforms," I replied. A pause. "You're calling because you want to fight this. I need access, records, legal precedent. And I need you to remember who I was before I wore heels." She sighed. I never forgot. By the next morning, I was knee-deep in case law. Every dusty page reeked of patterns. Officers accused of excessive force. Judges who looked the other way. Defenders silenced for speaking up. A courtroom should be a crucible, but this one, it was a machine, and it was eating people alive. On day 5, I filed my own motion. Petition for federal inquiry into judicial misconduct and excessive force. I signed it with my full title, Naomi Ellison, Eskiern, Lieutenant Colonel, Red N, U.S. Army. And then I waited. But I didn't wait in silence. I went public. I gave interviews. I spoke on live streams with civil rights groups. I returned every email from survivors. And I listened, really listened to the voices of others who had sat on that same bench and been told to shut up, sit down, or plead guilty. I was no longer the only one speaking, and that terrified them. On the 7th day, I returned to the courthouse, not as a lawyer, not as a victim, but as a plaintiff. 2 federal marshals flanked me. I wore a tailored black suit, medals on my lapel, a face that said, "I've survived worse than this." Reporters crowded the stairs. Flashes exploded. And from inside, through the marble columns, I saw them. Judge Carol Whitmore, Sergeant Blake Turner. They weren't expecting me to come back, and certainly not like this. As I stood before the press, I raised my voice, calm but unshakable. On January 18th, I was assaulted in this courtroom by an officer of the law. My only weapon was my identification. My only crime was existing in this space while black. I have served this country in war zones where truth and justice were not just slogans, but lifelines. I did not come here to make noise. I came here to remind this city what the law really looks like. Silence followed, then a slow ripple of applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to let me know they saw me now. Later that evening, a man knocked on my door. He wore a suit, clean-shaven, eyes sharp behind narrow glasses. Miss Ellison. Yes. He handed me a letter official seal from the Department of Justice. You've been granted a preliminary federal review. Internal Affairs has reopened your complaint, effective immediately. I stared at the paper. I wasn't sure if I was trembling or if I'd just stopped breathing. That night I sat alone in my study. Jasper curled beside me. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply opened my laptop, created a new folder, and titled it Operation Restore Courtroom. They thought I didn't belong there, but I wasn't there for permission. I was there to reclaim it. When you've worn the uniform, you see things differently. You learn to read posture, voice tones, silence. You know when someone's afraid and when they're hiding something. Sergeant Blake Turner wasn't afraid. He was arrogant, too calm, too collected in the aftermath. Only one kind of man acts like that after punching a woman in front of a judge. The kind who knows he's protected. So I dug deeper. I started with public records. Turner had been with the Newark PD for 12 years, commended 5 times, suspended twice both times for use of force during non-compliance incidents. Both cases sealed. I filed FOIA requests, called in favors, pulled up names of the non-compliant individuals. They were all black, all under 25. 2 of them dead within a year of their arrest. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. And patterns tell stories. Next, I looked at Judge Carol Whitmore, the queen of Municipal Courtroom B. She had a flawless record on paper, but behind her polished exterior I found cracks. Her son, Ethan Whitmore, had been arrested 3 years ago on drug possession charges. The arresting officer, Sergeant Turner. The charges dropped within 48 hours. The arrest report heavily redacted. I stared at the file for hours, connecting dots that no one else seemed to want to see. Turner wasn't just Whitmore's enforcer, he was her fixer. She'd protected him, and in return, he protected the illusion of her courtroom. But illusions fade under light, and I was the floodlight they feared. I interviewed court staff anonymously. Most refused. A few cracked. One clerk whispered to me outside a bodega near Market Street. "I've seen it, Ms. Ellison. He roughs up defendants all the time, especially the young ones." Judge never says a word. "Why didn't you report it?" She blinked, eyes rimmed red. "Because my cousin filed a complaint once. Lost her job 2 weeks later. Said it was restructuring." But everyone knew. Fear, that's what ruled that courthouse. Not justice, not law, just fear. I printed every document I found, pasted them on my office wall like a war map. Turner, Whitmore, their arrests, their sealed records, the missing footage. Yes, missing footage. I had requested security tapes from the courtroom on the day I was attacked. The official response: no usable video available due to a recording failure. How convenient. But I wasn't new to this. I called a friend at Homeland Security back from my Army days. He laughed when I explained. "They think courtroom feeds only go to local servers," he said. "Most systems now mirror to a central judicial cloud archive." He sent me a file 2 days later. The footage. It showed everything, from 5 angles. Turner hitting me falling, the judge looking and choosing to do nothing. I watched it 10 times. Then I uploaded it to a private link and sent it to every journalist I trusted. No commentary, no edits, just the truth. Within hours it hit the evening news. And this time, no one could spin it. The city erupted. Protests outside the courthouse. Students marching. Veterans holding flags beside signs that read, "She served this country." The court didn't serve her. I got messages from women I'd never met. I was assaulted too. He slammed my head against the bench. I never thought anyone would believe me. Each message was a wound. Each wound reopened my own. Then, one night I received a call, a man's voice. Shaky. "My name's Reggie Torres," he said. "My little brother was arrested 2 years ago by Turner. He died in county lockup. They said it was suicide. But he had bruises." I froze. "What do you want to do, Reggie?" "I want to speak." We met in a diner in East Orange. Reggie brought a shoebox of files, photos, medical reports, the coroner's statement, inconclusive trauma. His brother Malik had been 17, same age as Dante, same neighborhood, same cop, same cover-up. The press called it the Ellison pattern. Turner wasn't rogue. He was routine, a system within a system. And I, once invisible, was now the loudest voice in the building. But visibility came with danger. One morning, I found my car keyed, a single word carved deep: liar. That night, someone left a dead rat on my porch. I didn't flinch, didn't call the cops. I just poured gasoline on my fear and lit a match. The day after the protest hit national news, I got a visit. A black SUV parked across from my house. Out stepped 2 men in dark suits. One flashed a badge, Internal Affairs, Federal Division. "Ms. Ellison," he said, "we'd like to talk about Sergeant Blake Turner and Judge Whitmore." Inside, I handed them everything. The videos, the files, the testimonies. They stayed for hours, taking notes, nodding. Before they left, one of them said, "This isn't just about you anymore." "I know," I replied. "It never was." That night, I opened an old file cabinet and pulled out a sheet of yellow paper. At the top, handwritten in pen, was a quote I'd taped there years ago. "The system doesn't fail. It works exactly as it was designed." And yet, I believed it could be broken, no rewritten, because I'd seen what lies beneath the badge, behind the robe, below the skin. It wasn't just rot. It was history. But history doesn't scare me, because I've made it before, and I was about to make it again. There's a strange kind of silence right before the world shifts. It's not peace, not calm. It's the breath the storm takes before it arrives. I felt it the moment I picked up the phone and heard that voice. Crisp, measured, military. Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Ellison. It had been years since someone used my full rank. "Yes," I said. "Who's calling?" "This is Brigadier General Miles Kincaid, Joint Special Operations Command. You triggered a priority ping on the military clearance database. We need to talk, in person." That same afternoon, a matte black SUV with no license plate pulled up outside my home. 2 uniformed soldiers stepped out. Not local police, not federal suits. Army. Jasper growled low, not in fear, but like he recognized something I couldn't name. I clipped his collar, grabbed my bag, and walked out. They saluted. I didn't return it. Not yet. We drove to a secure military office in Newark. No names on doors, no brass on shoulders. Just polished boots, unreadable faces, and silence. Inside, a gray conference room sat General Kincaid. Late 50s, dark skin like riverstone, shaved head eyes that missed nothing. His posture was straight-backed but not rigid. There was respect in his stare. Not pity, not politics. Respect. He slid a folder across the table. "This is what your motion kicked loose. Inside, surveillance reports, communications logs, internal DOJ memos, and on top, photos of me entering courthouses, leaving my house, meeting with Reggie Torres. This is federal surveillance," I whispered. Kincaid nodded. "Turner's protected, not just by his department. He's connected to a broader pipeline, former military police private security firms, courthouse guards with quiet backgrounds, My fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. "You're saying this is organized." He leaned in. "I'm saying it's trained. And you're a threat because you know how to dismantle it." That's when it hit me. I hadn't just embarrassed a courtroom. I had disturbed a network. The courtroom was the face. But behind the mask, money contracts enforcement. "Why now?" I asked. "Because you still have active clearance," Kincaid said simply. "And because some of us never forgot Syria. You saved lives, Ellison. Mine included." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything in the room. That night I sat on my porch with Jasper, watching rain trace patterns down the steps. I remembered Syria, the broken buildings, the stench of gunpowder and dust, the voice of a hostage calling my name through a veil of blood. I didn't save him with bullets. I saved him with truth, with negotiation, with the quiet power of knowing exactly when to act. I hadn't thought about that in years. But now the battlefield was back. Only the uniforms had changed. The next morning I woke to headlines. "Feds launch probe into Newark court system." "Video surfaces linking Judge Whitmore to private security deals." "Victim turned whistleblower who is Naomi Ellison." I didn't read the articles. I was too busy preparing, because tomorrow I wasn't going back as a lawyer or a plaintiff or even a veteran. I was going back as a witness in front of the grand jury. The courthouse didn't feel the same. There were no smug glances from guards, no barked orders from bailiffs. Instead, tension. Tight-lipped administrators. Cameras hovering like hawks. I stepped into the hearing chamber with nothing but my files and my oath. Inside were 12 jurors, 3 federal attorneys, and a single empty chair for me. I sat, straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and began. I'm here today not as a victim of violence, but as a witness to a system designed to punish silence and protect brutality. I served this country for 18 years. I led recon teams through enemy territory. I extracted intelligence from war zones. And never once, not once, did I fear my fellow Americans. Until January 18th. I paused, locking eyes with each juror. Sergeant Blake Turner hit me, not because I posed a threat, but because I represented one. A black woman with knowledge, with power, and with witnesses. That slap wasn't impulse. It was calculated. Reinforced by a judge who has spent years protecting predators in uniform. I have evidence. I have testimony. And I have names. The question is, do you have the courage to listen? Silence. Then the first federal prosecutor stood. "We do." I presented everything. Files, video, affidavits from former court employees, a recorded testimony from Reggie Torres. And finally, I placed my clearance ID on the table. "For the record," I said quietly, "I still hold Tier 3 intelligence authorization." The room went still. Because in legal terms that meant my word didn't just carry weight, it carried jurisdiction. After 6 hours I walked out, nerves, frayed hands, shaking but spine straight. As I descended the courthouse steps, a crowd stood across the street. Some held signs, others just stood in silence, waiting. A teenage girl stepped forward. She wore a hoodie, braids tied back, face soft, but eyes fierce. She handed me a folded note. Didn't say a word. Then turned and walked away. I unfolded it slowly. 5 words in slanted pen. "You reminded me I matter." I closed my eyes and cried. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives on a piece of paper handed to you by the future you're trying to protect. And in that moment I knew. They weren't ready for what was coming next. But I was. They say courtrooms are places of truth. That truth rises like smoke in a room full of fire. But I've seen fire smother truth before. I've watched it drown beneath robes and badges and whispered deals behind closed doors. Not this time. This time I wasn't here to plead. I was here to prosecute. The grand jury had done its job. Enough evidence, enough fire. The case moved forward. Federal charges were filed against Sergeant Blake Turner for assault under color of law obstruction of justice and civil rights violations. Judge Carol Whitmore was under investigation for judicial misconduct and tampering with public records. And me, I was summoned to the same courtroom where I'd been hit to testify as the lead witness in a case that had now drawn national attention. The irony, they had to let me back in. The day of the trial, the courthouse looked different. Barricades, cameras, protesters, reporters shouting questions I didn't answer. I wore a black dress suit. My army ribbon pinned over my heart. No makeup. No cover-up. I wanted the world to see the scar just under my right eye. The one he gave me. Inside the room was packed. Federal prosecutors on the left. Turner's defense on the right. And in the gallery, dozens of faces I didn't know, but who had come just to witness this moment. The reckoning. Turner sat there, hands folded, expression cold. He wasn't in uniform anymore. Just a cheap navy suit that tried to make him look human. It didn't work. He looked like a man who had lost control of the narrative. Judge Robert Givens presided now, a visiting federal judge from Washington, D.C. No tolerance for theatrics. No loyalty to Newark. A fresh broom, ready to sweep. "Call your first witness," the prosecutor said. My name echoed across the chamber. I rose, walked past Turner, didn't flinch, took the stand, raised my hand. "I do," I said when asked if I swore to tell the truth. And then I told it. I told them about January 18th, about the slap, the silence, the gavel that came down harder than the fist. I explained my background, my service, my credentials, my clarity. I described the sealed records, the missing footage, the pattern of abuse. I introduced the jury to the people no one else saw. The kids pushed into plea deals. The mothers silenced. The dead. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. "Miss Ellison, did you or did you not reach into your bag abruptly in a courtroom already on edge?" I stared him down. I reached for my ID, as required by court protocol. Slowly, clearly, without hostility. "And what was your tone before that?" "Professional, firm. I do not modulate my voice to placate bias." He smirked. "So you admit you were assertive?" I admit I was not afraid. The room went still, because that's what they feared most. Not anger, not protest, defiance. They called Sergeant Turner to the stand. His lawyer coached him. He sat straight, spoke softly. He told the jury he feared for his safety, that her tone was aggressive, that he made a split-second decision under perceived threat. They asked him if he regretted it. He paused, then said, "I regret how it was perceived." Not what he did, just how it looked. And the jury heard every inch of that arrogance. But it was the next witness who broke the room open. Reggie Torres. He walked in holding a framed photo of his brother Malik, placed it gently on the witness stand before speaking. "My brother died in that same jail Turner sent him to. You call it detention. We call it a death sentence." He choked on the words. "I watched my mother bury her son in a suit he never got to wear to prom. And every day I wonder if someone had spoken up sooner. Would he still be here?" No one spoke, not even the defense, because there are silences that indict more than words ever could. Finally, Judge Carol Whitmore was subpoenaed. She refused to testify at first. claimed illness, then filed a motion to suppress. But the court compelled her. She entered like a ghost. No robe, no power. Just a woman unraveling. They asked about her relationship with Turner. She denied any personal allegiance, until they showed her emails, dozens of them, private messages requesting assistance on sensitive cases. And then the final nail. Security footage of her son Ethan being arrested with 3 bags of heroin footage that mysteriously never reached the evidence locker. And who handled that case? Sergeant Blake Turner. The courtroom gasped. Even Givens blinked. Would you say, Your Honor? The prosecutor asked that Sergeant Turner had reason to believe he could act with impunity in your courtroom. She said nothing. But silence is sometimes louder than confession. The trial lasted 7 days. Every minute of it, I sat in the gallery when I wasn't testifying. Not to relive it, but to claim it. I wasn't leaving. Not this time. The verdict came quickly. The jury returned in less than 4 hours. We all rose as the 4-person stood. In the case of the United States versus Blake Turner, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. The word echoed. Guilty. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat pale and motionless. But I saw his hands, shaking. They took him out in cuffs, and for the first time the badge didn't shield him. It bound him. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Cameras, reporters, signs that read, Justice for Naomi. Say her name. Speak her truth. I didn't speak to the cameras. I spoke to the crowd. I stood here weeks ago as a woman assaulted in silence. But today I stand before you as proof that silence is not the end. Justice is not a myth. And courage, your courage, is what turned this courtroom into a battlefield for change. A roar of applause. And then someone began to sing. A soft, steady voice. Amazing grace. Others joined in. Voices rising. Lifting the name of every victim silenced in that place. And I stood there, not broken, not bitter, whole. They always fall the same way, not with a bang, but with the weight of everything they built collapsing on top of them. Their walls, their lies, their silence. The morning after the verdict, I woke up to find my front porch lined with yellow tulips. No note, no names, just flowers. Dozens of them. Neighbors, strangers, mothers I'd never met. They came in the night to say what the courts had finally confirmed. We're not invisible anymore. But inside City Hall, panic was blooming. The trial had pulled the curtain back. And behind it, a network of rot. Judge Carol Whitmore resigned within 48 hours of the verdict. No press conference, no explanation. Just a 4-line statement faxed to the federal court. I hereby resign from my position effective immediately. I will not contest the findings of the federal inquiry. I offer no further comment. Her photo came down from the courthouse wall. Her name scrubbed from city history as if she never existed. But I remember, because people like her don't just retire. They retreat hoping time will blur their sins. Sergeant Blake Turner wasn't so lucky. He sat behind bars in a federal holding facility awaiting sentencing. But it didn't end there. More came forward. More tapes surfaced. More names. He wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a pack. An entire chain of officers' clerks, even probation officers, all under investigation for racketeering and systemic abuse. It wasn't just about me anymore. It never was. 1 week later, the police chief of Newark, Raymond Daly, stepped in front of the podium. He looked tired. For once, he didn't start with "We support our officers." Instead, he said, "To Ms. Naomi Ellison, on behalf of this city, I apologize. You were failed, attacked, dismissed, and still you rose. I'm ashamed it took national outrage to hear what you said clearly the first time. Today we begin rebuilding trust, not with speeches, but with action. Behind him stood 4 new oversight board members, all women of color, all former public defenders or civil rights attorneys, and one of them, me. The crowd in front of City Hall stood silent for a long moment. Then someone clapped, just one person, then another, and another, until the street echoed like thunder. But I wasn't there for the applause. I was there for her. Dante Mercer's mother, Camille, stood quietly to the side. She approached me as the cameras dispersed. Her eyes held something sacred grief and gratitude tangled together. "Naomi," she said softly, "you saved my son." I shook my head. He saved himself. I just made sure the system finally listened. She smiled through tears, then handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Dante. "Miss Ellison, I don't know how you kept standing when they tried to break you, but I watched, and now I know how to stand too. Thank you for showing me how. Dante." I clutched the letter to my chest, because that's what victory really looked like. Not the headlines, not the speeches. Letters from the kids who lived because I didn't sit down. 2 days later, a woman knocked on my door. Tall, elderly, gray scarf wrapped tightly under her chin. She didn't introduce herself, just pressed a flash drive into my hand and whispered, "They're still hiding things. Start here." Then she turned and walked away. The files were damning. Old cases, hidden body cam footage, deleted testimonies. The kind of evidence that didn't just damage reputations, it demolished them. With the help of federal agents, I organized a private task force, covert, legal, relentless. We called ourselves Reclaim. Every member was a survivor of the system. And now we were building something no one could silence. By the end of the month, the state announced a full judicial audit. Dozens of courthouse employees were suspended, 3 judges removed, 2 officers arrested, entire case files reopened, and that courtroom, the one I'd been assaulted in, was shut down for renovation. But we knew they weren't fixing floors. They were scrubbing blood off the walls. I kept going, interviewed by 60 Minutes, invited to speak at the DOJ's Reform Initiative, featured on Time's Women of Justice list. But I turned down the spotlight whenever I could, because the real work, it was still outside the cameras. It was in schools, in shelters, in back rooms where mothers asked me how to save their sons. One night I found myself back at the courthouse steps, empty, quiet, the marble still stained near the entrance. I closed my eyes and remembered the first time I stood here, cheek burning, heart shattered, unsure if truth would ever matter again. But now, that truth had brought an empire down. Turner lost everything: his badge, his pension, his shield of invincibility. Whitmore lost the nameplate that once intimidated generations. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted reckoning, and I got it. The courthouse was no longer theirs. It belonged to the people now, to the voices they tried to silence, to every soul told they were too loud, too angry, too black, too poor. To me, that fall, I stood in front of a class of first-year law students. Guest lecturer. I wore jeans, no makeup, my scars visible. And I said, "You don't need a robe to be powerful. You don't need a badge to be brave. You need a spine, a story, and the willingness to be hated for telling the truth." They listened, wide-eyed, tense, but they listened. Because the fall of tyrants isn't the end of a story. It's the start of someone else's rise. It had been 9 weeks since the verdict. 7 since Turner was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 5 since Judge Whitmore disappeared from public view. And 3 since I found myself standing in front of my house, holding the folded flag I had earned in combat, wondering whether I was ready to raise it again. I used to keep that flag boxed, buried in my attic like a memory too sharp to touch. I didn't fly it anymore, not after coming home to a country where my color was still a verdict and my silence the price of survival. But now things felt different, not healed, not fixed, but possible, like maybe the soil was ready again. I stepped into the street and looked up. The morning light broke across the brick buildings of Newark like a soft promise. Children played on the sidewalks. Cars passed. And somewhere I heard a trumpet practicing behind a window. Peace, the kind that doesn't scream. The kind that hums gently because the danger has stepped back even just a little. I raised the flag slowly, not for a country that always got it right, but for the fight I had to wage in order to belong to it. And when it reached the top of the pole, I let the rope go, and let the wind carry what was once buried. My phone buzzed. A text from Dante. Got accepted into Rutgers. Full ride. Criminal justice major. I sat on my porch steps and cried. Not tears of pain this time. Tears of arrival. Because he made it. Because we made it. Because the courtroom meant something again. I walked down the block to Mrs. Gutierrez's corner store. She hugged me so hard I lost my breath. You know, she said, handing me a coffee, my daughter wants to be like you now. She said you're like Harriet Tubman, and Beyoncé rolled into one. I laughed. I'll take that as the highest compliment. Later that afternoon I met Reggie Torres in the community center parking lot. He had started a foundation. Named it after his brother Malik. They gave scholarships to kids with incarcerated parents. Built a hotline for reporting officer abuse. And painted a mural on the side of the old courthouse wall. A black woman with a briefcase in one hand and a torch in the other. Her eyes on fire. Behind her children rising from shadows into sunlight. Underneath it, in bold letters, "We see you now." The mural went viral, not because it was perfect, but because it was true, a testament to the people they tried to erase. At night, I sat in my study, Jasper at my feet, sorting through letters, dozens of them, from inmates, from mothers, from lawyers just beginning their fight. Your story made me believe again. I never thought I'd see someone like me win in court. You're the reason I stayed in school. I taped them to my wall, one by one, not as trophies, but as reminders. That every bruise, every scar, every sleepless night had planted something that now bloomed in others. One morning, I got a call from General Kincaid. He didn't say much, just Ellison. The Pentagon approved your citation upgrade. You're receiving the Distinguished Service Medal. I paused, for once speechless. You earned it, he said. Not just overseas, but here. The ceremony was quiet, private, held in D.C. at a marble hall lined with flags. I wore the same black suit, same Army ribbon, but this time my name wasn't whispered. It was announced. Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Ellison, survivor, defender, truth-teller. When they pinned the medal to my chest, I didn't think about war. I thought about courtroom B, that chair, that slap, that silence, and how I turned it into a sound so loud the entire country had to listen. After the ceremony, I visited the memorial wall for fallen soldiers. I traced names I didn't know, said silent prayers for lives cut short, and then I walked outside into the sunlight, carrying their memory, and knowing deep in my bones I had honored them. Not just by surviving, but by refusing to disappear. Back in Newark, the courthouse had a new plaque. It didn't bear a judge's name. It bore mine. in honor of Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Ellison, for standing when others sat, for speaking when others were silent, and for proving that justice isn't given. It's earned one truth at a time. People ask me now if I'm proud. Yes, but more than that, I'm ready. Because the fight never really ends. It just moves zip codes, changes names, puts on new uniforms. But now, it knows my name, too. The day Turner was transferred to a federal prison in West Virginia, I stood on my porch again. Same tulips, same flag, same quiet pride. And I whispered to the wind, "You thought you broke me." Then louder, "But you built a warrior instead." Let that be the last word they hear. Not fear, not surrender, but fire, lit from a single woman's refusal to stay silent. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just about me. It was about every voice that had been silenced behind polished benches and bulletproof glass. It was about a system that mistook quiet for weakness and obedience for justice. But I learned something: when you stand up, especially when it's hard, you give others permission to do the same. The meaning of life isn't survival. It's dignity. It's truth. It's the courage to fight not just for yourself, but for the people who thought no one would ever fight for them. They tried to take my voice. Instead, they gave me a platform. And from that platform, I didn't just rise. I lifted others with me. If this story inspired you, moved you, or made you think, don't scroll away. Leave a comment below. Tell us what justice means to you. Share this video. There's someone out there who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real, and dramatic stories of courage, dignity, and transformation. Because the most powerful weapon in the world is a true story that refuses to stay buried. Your voice matters. Let it be heard.